Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to dive into a stunning and eye-opening story. You will learn about the story of Octavio Montalban, a man who, after a near-death experience, had visions about the future of humanity and discovered hidden secrets that few would dare believe. Before we start, let us know in the comments which city you're watching us from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that will blow your mind. My name is Octavio Montalban, and I'm here to share with you a story that completely changed the course of my life. I was born and raised in Havana, Cuba, but it was in Columbus, Georgia, that I found my home and built my adult life. For many years, I worked as a corrections officer at the local Department of Corrections. It was difficult work, but it gave me stability and a sense of purpose. Before the event I am about to relate, my life was quite ordinary and predictable. I woke up early, went to work, spent long hours supervising inmates, and returned home to the arms of my wife Isabella and the smile of my young daughter. On weekends, he enjoyed hunting on the family farm on the banks of the Chattahoochee River. It was a simple life, but I felt fulfilled. I have never been a particularly religious or spiritual man. I believed in God, yes, but in a distant way, without much involvement. The idea of life after death or supernatural experiences was not part of my everyday life. I was a practical man, focused on the here and now, on the responsibilities of work and family. If someone had told me back then that I would have a near-death experience that would completely change my view of the world and the afterlife, I probably would have laughed and dismissed the idea as absurd. But life has a way of surprising us, of turning our world upside down when we least expect it. What I'm about to tell you happened in December 1982. It was a Friday, and I had just gone through a particularly stressful week at work. There was an attempted escape from the prison, which left all staff on high alert for days. When the weekend finally arrived, I was exhausted, physically and mentally. All I wanted was to escape into nature, to find some peace and quiet away from the gray prison walls and the screams of the inmates. It was in this state of mind that I made a decision that would change everything. I decided to go hunting alone without telling anyone. Isabella had already left for work when I woke up that Saturday morning, and I didn't want to bother her with a phone call. After all, it was just another day of hunting, something I had done hundreds of times before. What could go wrong? Little did I know that this seemingly innocent decision would take me on a journey beyond the limits of life and death, an experience that would challenge everything I believed I knew about reality and my place in it. In what happened that day, and in the days that followed, transformed not only my view of the world, but also the purpose of my existence. This is the story I want to share with you now. A story of death and rebirth, of fear and wonder, of darkness and light. A story that I hope can bring new understanding and perhaps a little comfort to those who fear the unknown that awaits us beyond this life. That Saturday morning, I woke up with the sun barely rising over the horizon. The air was cold and damp, typical of a Georgia December. I put on my hunting clothes, grabbed my shotgun, and headed out towards the family farm. The path was familiar. Each bend in the road burned into my memory after years of similar journeys. I arrived at the hunting spot around 10:15 in the morning. It was a place I had been countless times before, a clearing surrounded by tall trees, with the Chattahoochee River flowing not far away. The sound of water flowing and birds chirping was soothing, making me feel at home. I began preparing my gear, checking my shotgun and adjusting my clothing for the cold. So I headed to my favorite tree stand. It was a simple but sturdy structure that I had installed myself years ago. I've never had any problems with her before, and I had no reason to suspect anything would go wrong that day. As I climbed, I felt a strange sense of restlessness. It was as if a distant voice was trying to warn me to make me come back, but I ignored this feeling, attributing it to the accumulated tiredness of the week. I continued climbing, focused on reaching my usual position. When I reached a height of about 80 feet, yes, I liked being up high to get a better view of the area, I heard a sound that chilled my blood. It was a crack, loud and clear, that echoed through the silent forest. Before I could process what was happening, I felt the support give way beneath my feet. What followed was a fall that seemed to last an eternity. In reality, it was only seconds, but in those brief moments, my entire life flashed before my eyes. I saw Isabella, my wife, smiling at me on our wedding day. I saw my daughter taking her first steps. I saw my parents, now deceased, waving to me from an impossible distance. The wind whistled in my ears as I fell, and I knew I was about to die. There was nothing I could do to avoid the impending impact. I closed my eyes, and in a last moment of lucidity, I asked God for forgiveness for all my mistakes and begged Him to take care of my family. Then came the impact. It was pain like I had never felt before, explosive and total. I felt my bones breaking, my organs being crushed. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. For a brief moment, I felt indescribable agony, and then nothing. Darkness enveloped me, and I thought, that's it. I'm dead. But he was wrong. What came next was an experience that challenged everything I believed I knew about life, death, and what lies beyond. The moment I left my body is something I will never forget. It was like waking up from a dream, but instead of opening my eyes to the familiar world of my room, I found myself floating a few feet above the Chattahoochee River. At first I was confused. How could I be there looking down when seconds before I was falling? Then I saw something that shocked me deeply. My own body, destroyed on the rocks on the riverbank. It was a surreal sight. There I was, or rather my physical body, with my limbs at impossible angles, blood oozing from visible wounds. My eyes were open, but empty, lifeless. And yet I was conscious, watching everything from above. I didn't feel pain. In fact, I felt absolutely nothing physical. It was as if all bodily sensations had disappeared. In its place was an indescribable lightness, a sense of freedom that I had never experienced before. I tried to move, and found that I could do it just by thinking. There was no longer a need for legs or arms. I simply wanted to go somewhere, and there it was. I floated around my body, examining it from every angle. It was me, without a doubt, but at the same time, it wasn't me anymore. At that moment, a strange calm enveloped me. I knew I was dead, or at least that my physical body was dead. But instead of fear or sadness, I felt a deep acceptance. It was like a part of me always knew that death wasn't the end, just a transition. I thought about my family. I saw Isabella and our daughter in my mind, and I felt a pang of sadness at leaving them. But even this sadness was different, as if seen through a filter that softened all emotions. As I floated there, I noticed that my perception had changed. I could see colors I had never seen before, hear sounds that would normally be beyond human reach. It was as if my senses had been heightened, allowing me to experience the world in a whole new way. I looked up at the sky, and for the first time I noticed a soft light on the horizon. It wasn't the sun, it was something different, something that called me. I felt an irresistible pull toward this light, as if it were my destiny. It was at that moment that I started to climb, not of its own accord, but as if it were being gently pulled upward. I looked down one last time, seeing my body getting smaller and smaller, until the forest, the river, and everything I knew as my world faded into the distance. I was leaving behind not just my body, but my entire earthly existence. And yet, I felt no fear. On the contrary, I felt a growing excitement, a curiosity about what would come next. It was the beginning of a journey that would forever change my understanding of life, death, and everything in between. As I climbed, the earth became smaller and smaller below me. It was an incredible sight. The blue and green planet, shrouded in white clouds, floating in the vast black ocean of space. For a moment I marveled at the beauty and fragility of our world seen from this perspective. But soon my attention was drawn to something in front of me. A tunnel opened up in space, as if the very fabric of the universe had torn apart. It was dark, but not frighteningly dark. It was more like twilight with a promise of light beyond. I felt myself being pulled into this tunnel, not violently, but with an irresistible gentleness. As I entered, I noticed that the walls of the tunnel were not solid. They were made of a pulsating, living energy that emanated colors that I had never seen before. They were more than colors, actually. It was as if each tone carried emotions, memories, fragments of lives lived. As I advanced through the tunnel, these color emotions enveloped me, passed through me. For a moment, I felt like I was experiencing thousands of lives at once. I saw joys and sadness, victories and defeats, love and losses. It was overwhelming, but somehow it wasn't too much to bear. Time lost all meaning inside the tunnel. I can't tell if the trip lasted seconds or eternities. All I know is that during this journey, I felt a deep peace and a sense of belonging that I had never experienced before. As I went along, I started to hear music. It was like nothing I had ever heard on Earth. It was a perfect harmony, as if the universe itself was singing. The music seemed to call me, guide me to the end of the tunnel. As I approached the end, the light became more and more intense. It wasn't a blinding or uncomfortable light. It was warm, inviting. I felt like I was coming home after a long journey. When I finally emerged from the tunnel, I was greeted by a sight that defies earthly description. It was a place of transcendental beauty, a realm of light and harmony that made Earth seem a pale reflection in comparison. I floated there for a moment, taking it all in. It was then that I realized I was no longer alone. There were presences around me, entities of light that seemed to welcome me. I wasn't afraid. On the contrary, I felt a deep joy, as if I were meeting old friends after a long separation. One of these entities approached me. It did not have a physical form as we understand it, but I could feel its presence as real as anything I had ever experienced in earthly life. The entity spoke no words, but I understood its message clearly. "Welcome, Octavio. Your journey has just begun." As the bright light at the end of the tunnel dimmed, my eyes, or whatever I was using to see in that state, began to adjust. It was then that I saw something that took my breath away, if I was still breathing at that moment. Before me stretched a city of unimaginable proportions. But it was not a city like any other I had ever seen or imagined. Every building, every structure, seemed to be made of a crystalline material that reflected and refracted light in impossible ways. The towers rose majestically, some so high they seemed to touch the stars themselves. Bridges of pure light connected the buildings, forming an intricate web of glowing paths. Sources of pure energy gushed in squares and parks, creating cascades of colors that constantly changed. The streets, if they could be called that, seemed to be made of solidified rainbows. Every step I took, even though I wasn't actually walking in the traditional sense, produced a musical harmony, as if the city itself was responding to my presence. The most impressive thing was the light. There was no single source of light, like the sun on Earth. Instead, everything seemed to radiate its own luminescence. The colors were more vibrant than anything I had ever seen, including shades I didn't even know existed. As I took in this incredible sight, I noticed I wasn't alone. Were there other souls? Entities? I'm not sure what to call them. They moved around the city, some alone, others in groups. They did not have defined physical shapes. They were more like fields of light energy. Yet somehow, I could feel their emotions, their essences. It was then that one of these entities approached me. She had a welcoming, almost familiar aura. When he spoke, it was not with words, but with thoughts that formed directly in my mind. "Welcome, Octavio," said the entity. "I am Laureano, your guide in this realm." Laureano did not have a conventional human form, but his eyes, points of more intense light in his energy field, constantly changed color, like a cosmic kaleidoscope. "Where am I?" I asked, surprised that I could form coherent thoughts in this state. "You are in what many on Earth call the afterlife," Laureano responded. "But this is just a transition point, a place of reflection and learning before the next stage of your journey." Laureano began to guide me around the city, explaining that each structure, each manifestation of energy, had a purpose. Some buildings were cosmic libraries, containing all the knowledge of the universe. Others were healing centers, where wounded souls recovered from past traumas. We passed by a huge amphitheater where souls gathered to share experiences and wisdom accumulated over multiple lifetimes. In another location, I saw what appeared to be a nursery of newly arrived souls, being cared for and prepared for their next journeys. As we progressed, I began to feel an irresistible pull toward one building in particular. It was an imposing structure, larger than all the others, that seemed to pulse with an ancient and powerful energy. "That," said Laureano, noting my interest, "is the Hall of Judgment. It is there that souls meet with the Council to review their lives and determine the next steps in their spiritual evolution." I felt a mix of anxiety and expectation. Somehow I knew that was where I was being called. Laureano led me down a long corridor that seemed to go on forever. The walls were made of a material that reflected not only light, but also memories, glimpses of past lives, not just mine, but those of countless other souls who had passed through here before. Finally, we came to a shiny metal double door. It was huge, imposing, decorated with symbols and patterns that seemed to contain all the wisdom of the universe. "Are you ready, Octavio?" Laureano asked. I took a deep breath, or at least the spiritual equivalent of that, and nodded. The doors slowly opened, revealing a light so intense that for a moment I thought I would be consumed by it. I took a step forward, entering the Hall of Judgment, not knowing what awaited me but feeling that I was about to face the most important moment of my existence. Upon entering the Hall of Judgment, I was immediately enveloped in a light so bright that for a moment I lost all sense of myself. It was as if I had dissolved into that luminosity, becoming part of it. Little by little my consciousness readjusted, and I began to discern shapes within that sea of light. In the center of the hall, there was a throne. Not a throne like the ones we know on Earth, made of gold or precious stones. This one was made of pure energy, constantly pulsing and changing, as if it were alive. And in him, sitting, or rather existing, was a presence so vast and powerful that I could barely comprehend it. I can't say I saw a definite figure. It was more as if I were facing the entire universe concentrated in a single point. The presence radiated an ancient wisdom, an unconditional love, and an understanding that encompassed all existence. Then, the entity spoke, not with words, but directly in my mind, in my soul. "Octavio Montalban," resounded the voice, not just in my ears but in every fiber of my being. "You have reached the end of one journey and the beginning of another." I wanted to talk, ask questions, but I felt completely speechless in front of that presence, as if reading my thoughts, and that was probably exactly what was happening. The entity continued, "You have questions. It's natural. But before we answer, we must review the life you just left behind." At that moment, my entire life began to unfold before my eyes. But it wasn't like watching a movie. I was reliving every moment, every decision, every interaction. And not only that, I could feel the impact of each of my actions on the lives of those around me. I saw the moments of kindness, when I helped a struggling coworker, when I was patient with an inmate who was having a difficult day. I felt the joy these actions brought, not just to others but to myself. But I also saw the moments I wasn't proud of, the times I was impatient with my wife, the missed opportunities to be a more present parent, the hasty judgments I made about others. The most surprising thing was that there was no condemnation in this review, just a deep, compassionate understanding of every choice, every circumstance. When the review ended, I felt exposed, vulnerable, but also deeply understood. The entity's voice sounded again. "What have you learned from this life, Octavio?" I reflected for a moment before responding. I learned that every action, no matter how small, has an impact, that love and compassion are the most powerful forces we have, and that I still have a lot to learn and grow. I felt a wave of approval emanating from the entity. "You have learned well, Octavio, but your journey is not complete." I was surprised. "Isn't it?" But I died, didn't I? Physical death is just a transition, not an end, explained the entity. Your mission on Earth is not over yet. There is more for you to do, more lives to touch, more lessons to learn and teach. I felt a mix of emotions, surprise, a bit of apprehension, but also a sense of renewed purpose. You will return, the entity continued. But you will take with you the understanding you gained here. Use it wisely, Octavio. Each life is a precious opportunity for growth and to spread light in the world. I had so many questions, so many things I wanted to know. But before it could formulate any of them, the entity added, Remember, Octavio, you are not alone. We will always be with you, guiding and supporting. Now prepare to return. Your new mission awaits. With these words, I felt myself being gently removed from the presence of the entity. The light began to fade, and I found myself being taken back, through the crystal city, through the tunnel of light, back to the world I knew. But now, I returned transformed, carrying with me an understanding and a purpose that would change the course of my life forever. The return to my body was abrupt and shocking. One moment I was in the presence of that sublime entity, enveloped in light and cosmic understanding, and the next, I was violently pulled back into physical reality. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. I opened my eyes and found myself lying on the rocks at the edge of the Chattahoochee River, exactly where I had fallen. Every breath was agony, and I could feel that several of my bones were broken. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth and my vision was blurred. Despite the excruciating pain, a burning certainty burned inside me. I needed to survive. The entity's words echoed in my mind. I had a mission to fulfill, a reason to return. This conviction gave me strength I didn't know I had. With a monumental effort, I managed to drag myself away from the riverbank. Every move was torture, but I refused to give up. I remembered the warning I received during my experience. I must not allow surgery or I would never walk again. This information became my mantra, giving me the strength to continue. I don't know how long I stayed there, alternating between consciousness and unconsciousness, fighting to stay alive. It could have been hours or days. Time lost all meaning amidst the pain and struggle for survival. Finally, I heard distant voices. Someone had noticed me missing and organized a search. I mustered the last of my strength to scream for help, a faint, hoarse sound that I barely recognized as my own voice. What followed was a blur of activity. I vaguely remember being placed on a stretcher, the sound of a helicopter, urgent voices discussing my condition. Through it all, I clung tightly to conscience, determined not to succumb. At the hospital, the doctors were shocked by the extent of my injuries. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, organ damage. It was a miracle I was still alive. They wanted to take me to surgery immediately, but I vehemently refused, to everyone's astonishment. No surgery, I repeated, my voice no more than a whisper. I will recover. I will walk again. The doctors tried to reason, saying that without surgery, I would be permanently paralyzed if I survived. But I stood my ground. Something inside me, a certainty that went beyond any earthly logic, told me that I needed to trust what I had learned during my experience. Isabella, my wife, arrived at the hospital in tears. When he saw me covered in tubes and machines, his face turned pale, but I managed to hold his hand and look into his eyes. It's going to be okay, I said, with a conviction that surprised her. I came back for you and our daughter. I will get better. The days that followed were a constant battle. Pain was my constant companion, but I accepted it as part of the healing process. Little by little, to the astonishment of the doctors, I began to show signs of improvement. Wounds that should have taken months to heal were healing in weeks. The most surprising moment came about a month after the accident. I was lying in the hospital bed doing my physical therapy exercises when I felt a tingling sensation in my legs. At first I thought it was imagination, but then I was able to move my toes. The room exploded with activity. Doctors were called. Tests were done. No one could explain how I was regaining sensation and movement in limbs that, according to all tests, should have been permanently paralyzed. But I knew. He knew it was the fulfillment of the promise made in that realm beyond life. I had a mission to accomplish, and my body was healing so I could accomplish it. Recovery was neither easy nor quick. There were months of intensive physiotherapy, of small victories and frustrating setbacks. But every day I grew stronger, more determined. The experience I had gave me a completely new perspective on life, death, and the purpose of our existence. Finally, about 6 months after the accident, I took my first steps without assistance. It was a moment of triumph, not just for me, but for everyone who had followed my recovery journey. Isabella cried with joy. The doctors spoke of a miracle. But for me, it was just the beginning. I knew I had come back for a reason, and I was determined to find out what that reason was and fulfill my mission, whatever it was. In the months following my release from the hospital, I began to realize that my life had changed in ways that went far beyond mere physical recovery. The near-death experience not only saved my life, but it also completely transformed my perspective on the world and my role in it. At first, it was not clear to me exactly what mission I was entrusted with during my journey to the afterlife. He only knew that he had been sent back for a purpose, and he was determined to find out what it was. I started to notice subtle changes in myself. I became more empathetic, more in tune with the emotions and needs of those around me. It was as if I could feel people's energy, their joys and their pains, in a way I had never experienced before. This new sensitivity first manifested itself at home. My relationship with Isabella and our daughter has deepened in ways I never imagined possible. I could feel their concerns before they even expressed them, and I found patience and understanding in myself that I didn't know I possessed. At work, things have also changed drastically. I returned to my job as a correctional officer, but with a completely new perspective. Where before I saw only criminals, I now saw lost souls, people who had made bad decisions but who still had the potential for change and growth. I began to become more deeply involved with prison rehabilitation programs. I began to dedicate my free time to talking to inmates, listening to their stories, offering guidance and hope. To my surprise, I discovered that I had a gift for this. Inmates responded to my empathy and understanding in a way that surprised even prison psychologists. One day, while talking to a young inmate who was struggling with drug addiction, I had an epiphany. The young man was telling me about how he felt lost, without purpose, and suddenly, the words of the entity I encountered during my near-death experience echoed in my mind. Each life is a precious opportunity for growth and for spreading light in the world. At that moment, I understood what my mission was. I had been sent back not only to live my own life more fully, but to help others find meaning and purpose in their lives, to be a beacon of hope for those who felt lost in the darkness. With this understanding, I started working even harder. I proposed new initiatives in prison, including meditation and self-knowledge programs. Surprisingly, the prison administration was receptive to my ideas, especially when they saw the positive results they were having. But my mission wasn't just limited to my prison work. I began speaking at local churches, support groups, and schools, sharing my experience and the wisdom I had gained. He spoke about the importance of living with purpose, of treating others with compassion, and of recognizing the interconnectedness of all things. At first, I was hesitant to talk openly about my near-death experience. I was afraid that people would think I was crazy or wouldn't believe me. But to my surprise, many people were receptive to my story. Some even shared their own similar experiences that they had never felt comfortable sharing before. As my work expanded, I began to receive invitations to speak at conferences and larger events. I wrote a book about my experience and the lessons I learned, which, to my surprise, became a bestseller. I suddenly found myself in the position of being able to reach and impact so many more lives than I ever imagined. However, with this expansion of my influence also came new challenges. Not everyone was receptive to my message. Some accused me of being a charlatan. Others said I was spreading dangerous superstitions. I received threats and faced fierce skepticism. But instead of discouraging me, these difficulties only strengthened my resolve. I remembered the entity's words. "You are not alone. We will always be with you, guiding and supporting." This certainty gave me strength to continue, even in the most difficult moments. Over time, I began to see the fruits of my labor. Former inmates came to me to tell me how the conversations we had had changed their lives. I received letters from people all over the country saying how my book had helped them find hope in times of despair. I realized my mission was bigger than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about sharing my experience, but about being a catalyst for a larger shift in collective consciousness. I was helping people see beyond the limitations of physical life, to recognize their own divine potential and the importance of their actions on the grand tapestry of existence. And so, day after day, I continued my work. I knew I still had a lot to learn and a lot to do. But now, each morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose and gratitude. He had been given a second chance at life, and he was determined to make every moment count. One of the most intriguing and, I must admit, disturbing parts of my near-death experience were the visions of the future I received. During my encounter with the Supreme Entity, I was presented, or perhaps challenged, with glimpses of events yet to come. Importantly, these views were not like watching a film with a clear, linear narrative. They were more like flashes, vivid impressions that overlapped and sometimes contradicted each other. I understood that the future is not fixed, but a river of possibilities that constantly flows and changes based on our collective choices. One of the first visions I had was of conflicts on a global scale. I saw nations rising up against each other, wars that were not limited to geographic borders, but that spread like a virus, affecting every corner of the planet. These were not just conventional wars, but conflicts involving new technologies, cyber warfare, and mass manipulation of information. Another vision that shook me deeply was the collapse of government systems that I had always considered immovable. I saw the United States, my adopted country, experiencing unprecedented political and social turmoil. Institutions that formed the basis of democracy seemed to crumble, giving way to chaos that I never imagined possible in such a powerful nation. But the vision that terrified me most was a natural catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. I saw a volcanic eruption so massive, it obscured the sun, casting the world into months-long darkness. Entire cities disappeared under ash and lava, and the impact spread globally, affecting the climate, harvests, and the very survival of humanity. However, not everything I saw was dark and bleak. After these cataclysmic events, I had visions of a rebirth, of a new era for humanity. I saw people coming together in ways never before imagined, transcending ancient divisions of nationality, race, and creed. I saw the emergence of a new generation, young people with wisdom beyond their years and a deep connection to the earth and each other. These people seemed to possess abilities that bordered on the supernatural, an increased capacity for empathy, healing, and even communication beyond words. I witnessed the birth of new forms of society, based on cooperation instead of competition, on respect for nature instead of unbridled exploitation. I saw cities being rebuilt, not as the concrete metropolises we know, but as living ecosystems where technology and nature coexisted in harmony. One of the most powerful visions was of a technological advance that allowed direct communication between minds, creating a type of global collective consciousness. This did not erase individuality, but it created a sense of unity and mutual understanding that fundamentally transformed the way human beings interacted with each other and the world around them. These visions left me with conflicting feelings. On the one hand, fear and concern about the challenges and suffering that humanity would have to face. On the other, an unshakable hope in the human potential for overcoming and evolution. I understood that these visions were not inevitable predestinations but possibilities. The clear message was that the future was in our hands. Every choice we make, every act of kindness or selfishness, of construction or destruction, shapes the path we will collectively follow. This became a crucial part of my mission. It wasn't just about preparing people for possible future difficulties. but about inspiring them to make choices that could lead us to a more positive future. I began to emphasize in my talks and writings the importance of individual and collective responsibility, the need to think beyond our individual lives and consider the impact of our actions on future generations. Often, when he shared these views, he was met with skepticism or even ridiculed. Some accused me of spreading unnecessary fear, others of being a lunatic with the delusions of a prophet. But I knew I couldn't stay silent. Even if just a few people took my words to heart and started making positive changes in their lives and communities, it would be worth it. Over the years, as some of the events I saw began to unfold in the real world, more people began to pay attention. I didn't seek validation from this, as I knew the goal wasn't to prove I was right, but to inspire action and change. I learned to balance the urgency of preparing people for possible difficulties with the importance of keeping hope alive. Because if there was one thing my visions had shown me clearly, it was that the future wasn't written in stone. We had the power to shape it with our choices and actions. And so, I continued my work, sharing not only visions of possible catastrophes, but also visions of a bright, harmonious future that was within our reach. My mission has evolved to not only prepare people for what could come, but to inspire them to be active agents in creating a better future for us all. As I began to share my experience and the message I received, I soon realized that not all forces in the universe were happy with my mission. Shortly after returning home from the hospital, I began to experience what I can only describe as shadowy interferences. It all started with vivid nightmares. I found myself in a dark, suffocating place, surrounded by shadowy figures who whispered threats and warnings. "Be quiet," they said. "Forget what you saw. Mortals are not meant to know such things." At first I tried to ignore these dreams, chalking them up to post-traumatic stress from the accident, but they became more and more frequent and intense. I started waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, with the feeling that there was something evil in the room with me. Isabella noticed the change. "You look exhausted," she would say. "Are you sure you're okay?" I tried to reassure her, but the truth was that I was starting to question myself. Was he going crazy? Had my entire experience just been a hallucination and now my mind was creating these night terrors as a way of dealing with the trauma? Things got worse when I started having visions even when I was awake. Sometimes, in the middle of a conversation, I would see shadows moving in the corner of my eye. Other times I heard unintelligible whispers when I was alone. It was as if something was constantly watching me, following me. One day, while giving a talk about my experience at a local church, something really scary happened. Halfway through my speech, the lights started to flicker and the temperature in the room dropped drastically. I saw several people in the audience hugging each other, shivering from the sudden cold. And then, for a moment, I saw a dark figure at the back of the room. It wasn't a person, it was something other. His eyes glowed with an evil red light, and I felt a wave of fear and nausea hit me. At that moment, I remembered the words of the light entity I encountered during my experience. "You are not alone. We will always be with you, guiding and supporting." I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and mentally asked for protection and strength. When I opened my eyes again, the shadowy figure was gone, the lights returned to normal, and the temperature rose. This incident made me realize that what I was facing was real. It wasn't just nightmares or vivid imagination. There were forces trying to stop me from sharing my message. Over time, through research and conversations with others who had similar experiences, I began to better understand what was happening. These shadowy entities, as I came to call them, seemed to be manifestations of negative forces that exist on another plane of reality. They feed on fear, ignorance, and negativity, and see the expansion of consciousness and spiritual awakening as threats. The most disturbing thing was when I began to notice connections between these entities and certain individuals and organizations in the physical world. There seemed to be people in positions of power who consciously or unconsciously channeled these negative energies. Some even appeared to be actively in cahoots with these dark forces, using occult rituals and practices to gain power and influence. As I spoke more openly about these experiences, I began to receive more direct threats. Anonymous letters arrived at my house, warning me to keep quiet. I would receive strange calls in the middle of the night. I once found obscure symbols drawn on the door of my house. It was a scary and challenging time. There were times when I considered giving up, when fear and doubt threatened to overwhelm me. But every time I thought about stopping, I remembered the beauty and love I experienced during my journey beyond life. It reminded me of the importance of the message entrusted to me. Additionally, I began to receive signs that there were also positive forces protecting me. Sometimes they were little synchronicities, a white bird landing on my window at the exact moment I was thinking about giving up, or a stranger smiling at me on the street and saying, "Keep up the good work," with no apparent context. Other times they were deeper experiences. During meditations, I sometimes felt the comforting presence of the light beings I encountered in the Crystal City. In moments of great danger, when dark forces seemed about to overwhelm me, I experienced sudden waves of peace and protection, as if an invisible shield had been placed around me. Over time, I learned to deal better with these interferences. I developed spiritual protection practices, such as light visualization, positive affirmations, and prayer. I learned to recognize the signs of negative activity and not fuel it with fear or anger. Most importantly, I began to understand that these dark forces, frightening as they were ultimately powerless in the face of the power of love and light. They only had power over me if I allowed them, if I gave in to fear. This realization was profoundly liberating. Not that the interference has stopped completely. To this day, from time to time, I feel its presence. But now I see them as reminders of the importance of my work. If there are forces trying to stop me, it must be because what I'm doing is really important. I also learned to have compassion even for these dark entities. After all, they are also part of divine creation, playing their role in the great cosmic drama. Who knows? Maybe one day, they will even be redeemed by the light. This fight against dark interference has become an important part of my mission, not only to continue sharing the message of love and hope I received, but also to make people aware of the reality of these negative forces and how to resist them. Because in the end, that's what it's all about, a battle for human consciousness. And each of us has a role to play in this battle. Every act of kindness, every moment of expanded consciousness, every choice based on love rather than fear is a victory for the light. And so, I continue my journey, facing both the light and the shadow, always grateful for the opportunity to serve and always confident that in the end, love will prevail. Always remember, you are more than your physical body, more than your current circumstances. You are an eternal soul, a spark of the divine with unlimited potential for growth and transformation. Honor this truth in yourself and others, and together we can create miracles. May the light that I found beyond life shine in your heart and guide your steps. The journey continues, and the best is yet to come. Thank you for listening, and may God bless you all.